Nobody warned Marcus Hale that April Fool's Day in London is a different animal.
Back I guess, home in Portland, Oregon, April 1st means someone wraps your stapler in tinfoil.
Maybe your roommate puts googly eyes on everything in the fridge. Harmless stuff.
Stuff that ends with people laughing and somebody buying the other guy a beer. Marcus had been traveling for 11 days straight: Prague, Amsterdam, Paris, and he was running on that particular kind of tired that makes a person feel invincible.
The kind like, where bad ideas don't look bad yet. They look inspired.
He'd rolled into London the night before on a coach from St. Pancras.
Cheap hostel in Paddington. 6-bed dorm, pretty much, somebody's wet socks hanging above his pillow.
He'd slept 4 TBH hours, eaten a granola bar that tasted like cardboard and ambition, and by 8 in the morning he was already on the tube heading toward St. James's Park, and, I guess, because Buckingham Palace.
Every traveler has a list. Plus, whether they admit it or not. The morning was the kind of grey London does better than anywhere else. Not threatening. Just permanent.
Plus, the sky had made a lifestyle choice and wasn't interested in reconsidering. The trees along the mall were still bare enough that you could see all the way up to the Victoria Memorial, the Gold Angel at the top catching whatever thin light existed and throwing it back at nobody in particular. Marcus had his camera, a beat-up Nikon he'd been carrying since college, and his phone, and he was already filming before he even cleared the park. Talking into the lens the way he did, casual, like he was leaving a voicemail for his followers back home.
About 40,000 of them. Enough that it mattered.
Not enough that anyone had ever offered him a sponsorship worth taking seriously. Okay, so I'm walking up to Buckingham Palace right now and I have an idea, he said into the camera.
It's April 1st. And there are actually these guys, the Queen's Guard, the ones in the bearskin hats, and they're not allowed to move. At all, and I was thinking. He stopped walking. Grinned at the lens. I was thinking about what happens if I stand right next to one and just talk. About the most boring thing I can possibly think of.
For as long as possible.
He'd seen the videos.
Everyone had seen the videos. The guards were trained.
Basically, stoic.
Uncrackable, which I mean, some of them looked barely 20 years old and still managed to stand there like they'd been carved. The whole point was the stone face, the stillness, the absolute refusal to acknowledge the circus of tourists that orbited them daily like a very loud, very underdressed solar system.
It was April 1st. He figured, pretty much, what's the worst that happens?
The area around the palace gates was already filling up.
Groups of school kids in matching fluorescent vests.
A tour guide with an umbrella held aloft, explaining something with the enthusiasm of a man who has explained the same thing 800 times and discovered, somewhere around repetition 400, that performance is a survival mechanism. A couple from Marcus Guest Japan, based on the matching scarves, photographing everything with a precision that shamed his own amateur eye. And there, in front of the sentry box to the left of the main gate, stood the guard. He was tall. Taller than Marcus had expected, though he couldn't have said why he'd expected anything different.
The bearskin hat added another 18 inches?
So the total effect was something close to architectural. He stood with the rifle at his side, white-gloved hands at perfect positions, eyes focused on a middle distance that apparently existed somewhere slightly beyond the visible world. His face was young. That pretty much was the thing Marcus noticed first when he got close enough. Younger than the hat, younger than the uniform, younger than the absolute stillness that surrounded him like a second skin.
22, maybe 23.
And, completely, immovably present in a way that Marcus at 31, perpetually wandering, answering to no one, found both impressive and vaguely humbling. He didn't let the humbling part slow him down. He stepped up TBH, beside the sentry box, held his camera out at arm's length, the guard visible over his shoulder in the frame. "All right," he said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still, embarrassingly, loud enough for the nearest cluster of tourists to hear.
Operation April Fool's Royal Guard Edition.
I'm going to describe, in full detail, the entire plot of the 2006 film Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties.
Every scene. every line I can remember. Starting right now.
A woman nearby, mid-50s, sensible coat, a tote bag that said keep calm and carry on in the font that had achieved something close to immortality through sheer exhaustion, looked at him sideways.
He began. Okay, so the movie opens, right, and Garfield, you know Garfield, the cat, hates Mondays, loves lasagna. Garfield is at home in the suburbs and there's this whole thing about the guard didn't move. About how he gets this collar, right, this royal collar that belonged to some British cat, a prince cat, basically, and, through a series of coincidences that I think we're all supposed to not examine too closely, not a flicker, he ends up in England. This is actually weirdly relevant given where I'm standing, I want you to know that. A small crowd had started to form. Not a big one.
The tour guide with the umbrella glanced over, decided it wasn't his problem, and kept talking. 2 teenage boys filmed on their phones, and the woman with the tote bag stayed.
The guard's eyes didn't move. His hands didn't move.
The rifle didn't move, and Marcus was 7 minutes into the plot of Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties. He was, objectively, having a great time. What nobody tells you about pulling a prank near the palace is this: the guards aren't alone.
The sentry at the box is the one you see. The one you film.
The one that, well, every tourist has built a fantasy around: the inaccessible, the stoic, the immovable. But there are actually others, which mounted on the other side of the gate,
standing at intervals along the fence.
And, less obviously, moving in pairs along the perimeter in plain sight if you know to look, or completely invisible if you don't.
Marcus didn't know to look.
He sort of was 11 minutes deep into a film synopsis. The small crowd around him had grown to maybe 20 people, and some of them were genuinely laughing, not at the guard, but at Marcus, at the sheer absurdist commitment of a man in a North Face jacket explaining a Garfield sequel to the most professionally indifferent human being on this land.
And then, Garfield meets the dog, right, the big dopey dog who's actually kind of sweet when you get to know him. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. Deliberate, getting closer. He didn't register them at first, he was mid-sentence.
The crowd was engaged.
His camera was rolling.
But the woman with the tote bag, she registered them. He watched her eyes move, track sideways, and then go very still in the specific way that eyes go still when they have spotted something that recontextualizes the entire scene.
Marcus turned. There were 2 of them. Not in ceremonial uniform.
These were the working kind, Metropolitan Police attached to the Palace Protection Detail. They were walking toward him with the kind of measured, unhurried pace that is somehow more alarming than running.
Running means panic. This pace meant something different. This pace meant, look, we have done this before, we have time, and we're in a hurry because you ain't going anywhere. The taller one, broad, maybe 40, the specific kind of unremarkable face that's actually very good at its job, stopped about 3 feet from Marcus. He didn't raise his voice, and, sir,
if you'd step away from the sentry post, please.
Not a question. The camera was still rolling.
Marcus was aware of this in 2 distinct ways simultaneously, as a content creator thinking this is actually incredible footage.
As a human being thinking I should probably stop filming now. He lowered the camera, and it's April Fool's, I was just talking, yes, sir.
If you'd step away, please.
The crowd had gone quiet.
I think, not uncomfortable quiet. More like theater quiet the moment before the 3rd act, when everyone has stopped shifting in their seats. Marcus stepped away from the sentry box, which the guard, throughout all of this, hadn't moved. Not once. They walked him about 30 feet from the gate.
Not arrested. Not restrained.
Just walked politely, firmly, to a patch of pavement near one of the tourist information boards, where the taller officer stopped and turned to face him with an expression that communicated several things at once: patience, mild exasperation, professional neutrality, and, somewhere underneath those, the faintest trace of something that in a different context might have been amusement.
Can I ask what you were doing, sir?
It's April Fool's Day, Marcus said. I was explaining a Garfield movie.
A pause. You know, Garfield. The cat. The sequel. To be fair, 2006.
Actually under-discussed in broader cultural, I know who Garfield is, sir.
Another pause. Longer, and, I guess, were you filming? Yeah. I have a travel channel. I wasn't trying to cause a problem. Nobody touched anybody. I wasn't doing anything physical. I was just talking.
The officer looked at him for a moment the way people look at a thing they're trying to decide how to categorize.
Then, he looked at the camera. Then, back at Marcus.
You're aware, he said, that the guard isn't a prop. And, something about the way he said it, not aggressive, not even particularly stern, just very level, very clear, like stating a fact that shouldn't need stating, landed differently than Marcus expected. He felt, to be fair, it's somewhere behind his sternum.
Plus, yeah, Marcus said. I know.
Not gonna lie, they didn't take his camera, they didn't confiscate anything. They asked for his name, wrote it in a notebook, which Marcus found both more and less alarming than he'd expected, and told him he was free to continue enjoying the palace grounds but should refrain from approaching the sentry posts.
What happens if I do it again? He asked. Not challenging. Genuinely curious.
The officer looked at him with the patience of a man who has answered this question in various forms for many years.
Then, we have a longer conversation, he said.
And, you miss your next flight. Marcus decided that was sufficient clarity.
He found a bench near the Victoria Memorial. Sat down. Opened his camera's preview screen and watched the footage back, the whole thing, start to finish, from the first shot of the empty morning palace to the moment he lowered the camera and the footage cut. Watched himself talk about Garfield for 11 minutes to a man who gave him nothing. Watched the crowd form. The teenagers filming.
The woman with the tote bag, which watched the officers arrive, move, walk him away with the unhurried certainty of people who have done this 100 times. And then, he watched something he hadn't noticed while it was happening. He scrubbed back and watched it again. 3 minutes and 40 seconds into his Garfield monologue, there'd been a sound to the guard's left. I think, not from Marcus. From further down the fence line, a child, maybe 3 years old, had broken away from his mother. Run full tilt toward the sentry box in the way that 3-year-olds run toward everything, arms windmilling, zero braking system, absolute commitment to the bit. The mother caught him before he reached the box. Scooped him up mid-stride, and the boy squirmed, pointed directly at the guard, and said something Marcus's camera mic had barely caught but, which, watching it back at full volume with his earbuds in, was clearly, that man is a soldier. And, the guard, the completely motionless, professionally uncrackable, stoic as architecture guard, had, for approximately half a second, looked down.
Not a turn of the head. Just the eyes.
Just a fraction of a degree downward, to where the small furious child was pointing.
At him with pretty much the unambiguous reverence that 3-year-olds reserve for things they consider genuinely magnificent. Then, back, which eyes forward. Look, middle distance. Gone. Marcus pretty much played it back 4 times. He sat with that for a while. The thing is, and he understood this sitting on the bench with the grey London sky doing its grey London thing overhead, the thing is, he'd gone there to prove something. I mean, not to the guard. The guard wasn't the audience for the prank. His followers were for what it's worth. The joke was, look how absurd and committed I'm, look how I made this person's job slightly stranger for a morning, look at the discipline versus the chaos, the institution versus the individual, good content, highly shareable, guaranteed comments. For what it's worth, and he'd gotten that. He had the footage. It was good footage. But, the thing he kept going back to was the eyes. The half second of looking down at a kid who had looked up at him like he was something worth looking at. That wasn't content that didn't fit the narrative he'd been building in his head since the tube. It was just a person inside a uniform, inside a role, inside a tradition that stretched back further than any individual it contained. For half a second that person had seen a child point at him like he was magnificent and something in him had acknowledged it. The guard had kind of been 22, maybe 23. Standing alone in front of a gate while tourists filmed him and ranked the quality of his stillness. Marcus put, to be fair, his camera away. He was still on the bench 20 minutes later when he became aware of a presence beside him. He looked up. The woman with the tote bag, which she sat down with the specific deliberateness of someone who has earned the right to sit wherever they want, and she looked out toward the memorial for a moment before she said anything. "You got quite the audience," she said, "and British." "Not London actually, somewhere north of it." The vowels had a different shape. "Yeah. Did you get what you came for?" He thought about it. "I got footage," he said. She nodded as if that was the answer she'd expected. "My son," she said, "did 2 years in that regiment. King's Guard." "Not here, Windsor." "But, the TBH, same training." Marcus looked at her. "He said the hardest part wasn't the standing still," she continued. "He said the hardest part was not reacting when people were kind to him. Somebody leaves a coffee. Plus, somebody's kid draws a picture and holds it up. He said that was worse than the rudeness. The rudeness you learn to put away, which the kindness just." She stopped. Honestly, looked at her hands. "He said it sat on you differently." Neither of them said anything for a moment. A pigeon landed 3 feet from the bench, examined them both without interest, and left. He's still doing it?" Marcus asked. "He's in Cyprus, I guess, now," she said. "Different posting." "I guess." She stood up. Adjusted the strap of her tote bag, keep calm and carry on, the thought that had survived everything, and looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite a smile but had some of the same warmth in it. "Happy April Fools," she said, and walked away. The hostel that night smelled like instant noodles and somebody's damp towel. Marcus sat on his bottom bunk, which he'd claimed with the aggression of a man who had spent too many nights in middle bunks, and went through the footage again. All of it. From the pretty much morning light on the mall to the moment the officer said you miss your next flight with the calm of someone who has that sentence memorized. He had 43 minutes of material. Basically, good material, technically. The kind of footage that cuts together cleanly, where you can feel the shape of the edit before you even start. Hook on the tube, set up walking up the mall. Build the tension with the growing crowd. Climax with the officers appearing, resolution, politely escorted, no handcuffs, minor humiliation, live to tell the tale. 40,000 followers would watch it, probably 60 if it got shared around. Could hit 6 figures if the algorithm felt generous. He opened his editing app. Closed it. Opened it again. Here's the thing about content that he'd never said out loud to anyone, including himself: there's the version you make for the number, and there's the version you'd make if nobody was counting. He'd basically been doing this for 3 years, 11 countries. Somewhere between Prague and Amsterdam he'd stopped journaling, the actual writing kind, the kind he'd done since he was 19, and replaced it with footage. Which isn't the same thing. It looks like the same thing. Plus, you're still recording your life. You're still making sense of places by paying attention to them. But there's a layer between you and the experience that footage doesn't have, and a journal does, which is, who's this for? A journal is for nobody. That's the whole point. Footage is always for someone. And, the moment you're always performing for someone, the question "did I feel something real today" gets replaced by "did I get something usable today?" Those two questions, Marcus had come to understand around day 200 of this life, aren't the same question at all. He scrubbed to the 3-minute 40-second mark. The eyes. Plus, down for half a second. At the kid. At the pointing finger. At the face of a child who had seen something worth looking at. Back to the middle distance. The crowd hadn't caught it. Plus, the teenagers filming on their phones hadn't caught it. Even Marcus hadn't caught it until he was watching playback alone on a bench in the cold. It was 30 frames, and less, maybe. A tiny mechanical adjustment of gaze that in any other context would be invisible. But, in the context of 11 minutes of perfect stillness, he didn't have a word for it. A rupture, maybe. Something true showing through a gap in the performance. He thought about what the woman had said. The kindness just sits on you differently.
He thought about her son in Cyprus, and he thought about being 23 years old and standing in front of a gate while strangers made content out of your discipline. He posted the video at 11:47 p.m. from his bottom bunk while the guy in the top bunk snored with the specific enthusiasm of someone doing it professionally.
It was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long.
He'd cut the Garfield monologue to 30 seconds, enough to establish the bit, enough to make you understand what he was trying to do. He'd kept the crowd forming.
He'd kept the officers arriving and walking him away.
He'd kept the bench, and himself on it, though he'd cut around to his own face talking to camera in that confessional register he used when he wasn't performing but just talking.
"I went there to prove I could make a soldier laugh," he said to the camera on the bench, the Victoria Memorial visible behind him, the gold angel barely visible in the gray. That was the whole plan. Get the reaction, and film the reaction. Post the reaction. He paused. I didn't get the reaction I wanted. Another pause. I got something else. And then, the 30 frames. The eyes going down. The kid pointing. He'd slowed it down to half speed. Plus, he hadn't put music under it. No text overlay. No arrow. He just honestly let it sit there, those eyes moving, that fraction of a degree, that half a second of a person inside an institution being seen by a person too young to know not to look. I mean, then, back. Middle distance. Gone. He captioned the TBH video, "I went to prank the Royal Guard." He won, and he put his phone face down on the mattress. Lay back. Listen to the snoring from the bunk above and the faint sounds of London doing its nighttime thing outside a window that didn't quite close all the way. He didn't check his phone until morning. By then, the video had 400,000 views. The comment he kept going back to out of 9,000, the one he kept returning to, was from an account with no profile picture, no followers, no content. Created, as far as Marcus could tell, namely to leave this one comment. It said, "My brother is in that regiment. He doesn't know I'm writing this. But I want you to know he talks about that kid. The little one who pointed. Plus, he told me about it at Christmas. He said it was the best part of his year." He's not allowed to say that out loud. But I'm saying it for him. Marcus read it 3 times in the hostel bathroom with the door locked and the fan running. Then, he washed his face, packed his bag, and caught the 9:15 to Edinburgh. He didn't do another prank video for 4 months. When he finally came back to the format, a new city, a different context, a smaller crowd, he'd changed one thing. Just one. At the end of every video, before the edit cut to black, he started leaving 5 seconds of silence. No music. No text. No call to action. Just 5 seconds, of whatever was real in the frame, the street, the light, the ordinary unremarkable world. That is always there, always doing its thing, indifferent to the camera and the count and the performance of a life lived out loud. 5 seconds, and for nobody. Like, for the 30 frames. For whatever sits on you differently when you stop trying to make it content and let it just be true.